everyone, it's Rebecca Levis. I'm coming to you from San Diego, and we're going to study Torah together today. Now, we're in the last Parashah of the book of Genesis, and last week we concluded with Joseph finally revealing himself to these brothers who had betrayed him. And the story is going to continue today. You're going to see their father Jacob bringing them all together and then giving them each a prediction about their future and all the generations coming from each of the 12 sons. So there's a lot to get started with. So let's get started, and I'll share my screen. So today's parashah is called Vayechi, and it means, and he lived. It starts the story of Jacob now living in the land of Egypt. And we're in Genesis 47:28, and we're going to go through 50, verse 26. So let's get started. Now, Jacob, at 130 years of age, and his whole family are now in Egypt. They're down there in exile. But this parashah begins with Jacob lived in the land of Egypt. Now, living means he thrived. He was blessed there. However, it was not home. It was not where God had intended him to dwell. However, because of the sins of his sons, they found themselves in exile, and they would live there and die in exile, in a land not their own. And I was thinking, this is so much like all of us today. Those of us who were cast out of the garden, and because of sin, all mankind fell. And now we're living in a spiritual exile. The moment we're born with the sinful nature. We already want our own way. Nobody has to teach us that, right? But the spirit in us is now empty. It was never restored. And so this is all about redemption of the lost or the scattered. And then at the end, bringing them all together as one. So this is a story in the here and now with this family, but also it's a picture that's bigger. It's a picture and prophecy of the final days when the Messiah returns and he brings all the scattered people back together under one authority. And this is the story of today. So we can apply this to our life because now we believers live under the authority of the Messiah. And when he comes back in his second return, then all the world will benefit. And that's the whole point of the Jewish people, is they were to be a light to the nations. They were to impact other nations, not vice versa. So let's look at the story. They sojourned in a land of Egypt. Now, to sojourn means to live temporarily as a guest. And isn't that what we talk about as believers in the New Testament? We say, and Rabbi Shaul Paul also says, this is not my land. I'm living here, but this is not where my heart is. My heart wants to go home. To be present here is to be away from home, because this is our temporary dwelling place. And so this is the story of Jacob temporarily dwelling in exile. So it's the beginning of what they call in Judaism the galut. The galut means exile in Hebrew, and it comes from the word galah. And here it is down here, gimel, lamed hey, and it means to expose, to lay bare, to live under a foreign rule. This is the condition of the world right now. Everyone who does not believe in Jesus as the Messiah and is not called a child of God, then they're living exposed to whatever comes in this world under the authority of this world, which is Hasatan, or Satan. And so that's what it means to be in exile. You're exposed, you're laid bare, you're living under a foreign ruler. And this is the condition of our world today. So this is called the scattering, the diaspora. And it is the scattering of the Jewish people throughout the whole earth. So scattering is negative. Gathering in the Bible is always speaking of redemption. So when you hear the word scatter, you're thinking exile. When you hear gather, you're thinking redemption, because that's the whole purpose of bringing many together as one. That's the whole Bible, the redemption story about restoring God's kingdom. So this is where we're going today. So Jacob lived first 17 years with his son Joseph before his brothers threw him in the pit, remember? And then it was another 17 years that Jacob lived with Joseph down in Egypt before Jacob died. And he died at 147 years. So Jacob spent a total of 17 before he was thrown in the pit, and another 17 for a total of 34 years with this son, the son that he loved. Now, in Gematria, each letter of the Hebrew alphabet has a number, just like in Latin. So like the first letter, Aleph, is number 1. So if you're going to chapter 1 of something, it'll just have an Aleph at the top, and you know it's chapter 1. And Bet, Dalet, Gimel, etc. Now, in this Parashah, we see that it's called Vayechi. And what's interesting is these letters add up to exactly 34, the number of years the Father spent with the beloved Son. So it's almost like you can see this bigger picture of the reuniting of Father and Son. And that also foreshadows Jesus, because he was with the Father, and then he left, and then he was restored back to the Father. So this is definitely a picture and a foreshadowing of the Messiah. Now, Vayechi means and he lived. And let's look at what comes out of that Vayechi. It's the word Chai for life. And it has 2 letters. This is a Het and a Yod. And together they equal 18. Now, remember, we said 8 is the number of new beginnings, and 10 was the number of completion, or when something is perfect. That's number 10. So together, to be complete and to start over is when you have life. So that is the whole picture of the new spiritual life that we have in Messiah. And did you know that in the Hebrew culture, 18 represents a lifestyle, or someone who's generous or kind, thoughtful, good, good-natured, moral, or ethical. And so what they do is they give them for gifts multiples of 18. So if you graduate from high school, they might give you $36 times 3, which would be 18 times 6. So they always look at 18 as a special number, and it's the number of life. I love knowing this about the Hebrew culture. It really does make it more fun as we learn, right? Okay, so let me show you something that's going to unroll the scroll for you. I love that word. Remember, I said it comes from Galah right here. I went back and said that, where is it? Here, when you're in exile, it comes from the word Galah. Well, another root word with this GL combination is the name of the scroll. So you can see that it's an unrolling and laying bare of the words of the Torah. So that's where you get Megillah. Here's the Gimel and the Lamed. So these are all related words. It means to unroll, to uncover, or what? Lay bare and reveal. So I love these words. To me, that is beautiful. So Jacob in this story now is near death, and he calls Joseph, and he makes him promise to take his bones back to where he was supposed to be in the first place. Remember, he's in exile. He was supposed to go to the land of Canaan, which is what his father was promised and his grandfather, Abraham. But because of the sin of his sons, he finds himself now in exile, the only one of the patriarchs who died outside of the promised land, very much like the Messiah, who died outside of heaven. He came here to die for the world. Okay, so he wants them promising that they'll take his bones back to the cave of Machpelah. Remember, we said Machpelah it means the root word to double or to couple. And so this is the cave where Abraham and Isaac are buried, and their wives, Abraham and Sarah, Yitzhak and Rebekah, and then Jacob is going to be buried there with his wife Leah. So this is what Joseph promises. And today you can go and see this cave of Machpelah. There's a building over it now, but it's in the West Bank in Israel. And Jacob believed the covenant promise. He knows, hey, I'm supposed to eventually get there. So don't leave me here in exile. Take me back to where I'm supposed to be. And this is the remembering of the promise. And so whenever you find yourself being upset about something, it's always, always important to go back and remember the promises of God. I mean, if you have to paste them all over your desk or somewhere where you can see them, when life gets tough, remember God's promises to us. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. You're mine. No one can snatch you from my hand. You're secure. You're loved. So this is important. So Jacob believed in these promises, and he knows that he wants to be resurrected. Where? In the promised land, not in Egypt. So this is important. And I said the same thing to my husband. I said, my grandparents and my parents are buried in Springfield, Illinois, and that's where I want my bones taken. He goes, well, where am I going to be? I go, well, you can come with me. I said, but that's my inheritance, and that's my people's bones. And I want to rise from the dead with my grandfather, who I never met, my mom and dad, and me, and you. So he's thinking about that. So I'll convince him. All right, so Joseph was sold at 17 years of slavery. And then we said Jacob enjoyed 17 years of peace. And I love that. Here he was suffering as a slave, and then God gave it back to him as the exact same amount of years now, living in peace. And so we can live in peace even though we're in exile in this world. This is Satan's kingdom. But one day we're going to go and we're going to dwell in God's kingdom. And Psalm 90, verse 15, I love this, says, make us glad for as many years as we are afflicted, and as many years as we have seen trouble. And so this is what you see being played out. Psalm 90 right there. So Joseph had two sons, and they were Manasseh and Ephraim. And what do their names mean? Manasseh, or Manasseh in Hebrew, is to forget your father's house. So Manasseh was Joseph naming him that because when he got this first son, it was such a blessing that it helped him to forget his past, his father's house, and realize that this was going to be his new land. And this is where he's going to establish his family. And so the second son, Ephraim, his name means to be fruitful or to multiply and fill the earth. So Joseph names these two sons that came out as twins, Manasseh first and then Ephraim. Now I love this because he brings them, as his father's getting old and about to die, he brings Manasseh and Ephraim to Jacob to receive the blessing before his father dies. Now Jacob asked, who are these? Now you can just look at it, you can look at it two ways actually. Who are these? In other words, his eyes were growing dim because he was old, 147, that's old. But also you could look at it a different way. Who are these now and in the generations to come? And the blessing that Jacob is going to give to these are going to follow them through their whole life. So attached to the blessing is a destiny. Attached to the promise and blessing is a future and a destiny. So this is what we're seeing here in this story. So Jacob must have had a flashback of Isaac through prophetic revelation, when God revealed to Jacob who they would become in the future. Okay, so remember, Jacob was told that he would have children that would bless the whole world. And so now God is revealing these sons in front of him, now with Joseph and now his two sons. So this is a revelation that's coming to fruition. So Jacob takes his hands and he places the hand of blessing to the firstborn, which is supposed to be Manasseh, yet he crosses his hands and puts the right hand of the double portion blessing on the secondborn, Ephraim. Now, Ephraim was told that his seed would grow into many nations. Your sons will be as mine, says Jacob to Joseph. So he wasn't confused when he did this. He said he had it with a knowing. So God told him to switch the hands. Now we see this pattern all through scripture where God overlooks the natural firstborn and gives the spiritual blessing to the younger one. We saw it with Cain and Abel. We saw it with, instead of Cain getting it, the Abel was favored. And then when he was killed, Seth came and received the spiritual blessing. Then we also saw it with Ishmael and Isaac. And we also saw it with Jacob and Esau. So here the pattern continues. He overlooks the firstborn in the natural, Manasseh, and he gives the hand of double blessing to Ephraim. Okay, so he already knew what he was doing. Now, Ephraim's blessing means son of my right hand. And so that's the hand that chooses. And so here it is. Ephraim is the chosen one to be fruitful. We're going to see at the end of this how God brings all this back together in such a beautiful way. So they were the 10. Ephraim will be the 10 scattered tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel. So those are Ephraim's people, 10 tribes, the north. Then Jacob reminded Joseph of the covenant promise that God made to him at Bethel or Luz. Do you remember that? Where God said to Jacob that he would be fruitful, multiply, and be a community of people, possess the land for all eternity. Not temporarily till someone else takes it from you, but for eternity, it will be the eternal possession of Israel and the sons of Jacob. Now, this is not going to change because somebody politically wants different parts of the land. It's never in God's eyes going to change. And so he says, you're going to be a community forever. And again, this applies to you and I as believers in the Messiah. We have an everlasting community. And that word in Hebrew is kahal. And in Greek, it's ecclesia. And in English, it's the word for church. So see, Jacob, through Joseph and his sons, Joseph being the foreshadowing of the Messiah, he says, coming from you is going to be this community or church. So see that? This is a story of you and I being born right here in this story. So by adopting Joseph's two sons, Jacob's blessing was including them in the covenant promises that were given to Abraham and Isaac. So he's including these sons of Joseph as if they were his very own. This balances out in the end as we see the Levites not given their own land because they're going to be the priesthood. So now to fill in, you'll have this extra two sons. Joseph will be gone, and you'll see Manasseh and Ephraim taking those two spots. So this is important that you see that this is happening here in the story. So the blessings involved an important word that here is really, I say, lost in translation. Now look, the English says, may they, the two sons, grow into multitudes. Okay, if you were just reading this in English, that would have no meaning except, okay, they're going to multiply. But let me show you what word they use here. It's a very interesting word in Hebrew. It's the word dagah. Dagah is another word. There's several words for multiply, like rabbah is to multiply or be larger. There's gadol is to be larger or mighty, but they use the word dagah, and I thought that is such an interesting look. It means to multiply quickly, but also look, It means fish, the name of a fish. So the multitudes that they're talking about here, we're going to see in the New Testament when Jesus, the Messiah, a Joseph foreshadowing, he's going to call his followers fishers of men. So you see the connection here between growing into a multitude and Jesus goes and calls fishermen. And what does he do? Israel, or Jacob's blessing, involved what? Two brothers. And in the New Testament, in Matthew 4:19, we see Jesus was walking near the sea, where the fish are, of Galilee, where he was ministering, and called two sets of brothers, Peter and Andrew, James and John. They were fishermen. And he says, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Dag, here's the word, D-A-G, dag is a fish. So see that connection? This is the promise fulfilled in the Messiah when he calls us to be fishers of men. So that's something you wouldn't see except in Hebrew. Now, Jewish parents, did you know, say a blessing over their children on every Shabbat, and it begins with the sighting of first 3 stars in the evening. Shabbat begins, and the father takes his hand and he blesses sons and daughters. And what they say over the son is this: may you be like Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, why them? Well, they were the first brothers in the story of the Bible without conflict from one of the patriarchs. Did you ever think about that? They're the first 2 brothers that never had to separate. And you see, it's the third Jacob. Remember, number 3 is new beginnings. So here you go. He's still to this very day using these 2 brothers that were at peace. And he's blessing the children. And for the women, they say, may you be like the matriarchs, Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, and Leah. So they're saying this blessing is going to just continue and continue. And this is what Jewish people all over the world do every week to this day, thousands of years later. So Jacob said to Joseph, God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. I will give you a portion above your brothers in the land of your fathers. So he's telling Joseph that he's going to give him this extra portion. And again, it's paying back what was lost, giving him more than he would have gotten with the brothers throwing him in the pit. So this is the double blessing that he's blessing Joseph with. Portions above the brothers. So Jacob says to everybody, gather together and hear, and I will tell you what will happen in the Acharit Yamim, which is the end of days, or sometimes what we call the last days. And I love these words. Jacob is talking about, of course, the descendants and their character and their roles. So he's going to give a blessing to each of the 12, and attached to that blessing is going to be a destiny. So he says, gather together, hear what is going to happen in the end of time. So not necessarily to these men personally, but through their tribes, things that will be happening in the end of time. So I always say, keep your eyes on what's going on in Israel and among God's people. So like Adam, naming the animals, remember he watched them and see what they were doing, and then you got a name, you were given a noun. So if you're running around in circles, then you get the name Egol, which is circular in Hebrew. And that's where you get the name calf. They jump out of the stall and they're happy and they run in circles. So same thing, your name says what you do, what you're going to be. So this is part of this blessing. So Jacob is seeing into the future, and he's speaking a blessing over the generations to come. I think this is a beautiful thing, to pick a Sabbath day, lay your hands on your children and give them each a blessing. Speak life into them. Speak blessing, speak future, speak destiny into your children. And they're never going to forget those words. I remember as a little girl, This is just a side story. I prided myself in being able to do things really quickly. And my father one day said to me, "You know, Dodie," Dodie was my nickname, and I found out later Dodie means my beloved in Hebrew. I didn't find out I had this Hebrew heritage until I was in my late 40s, early 50s. And my father called me Dodie. And he said, "You know what, Dodie?" He said, "You have fast hands." And I thought, "I do?" My father thinks I have fast hands. And do you know what? I got my only A's in nursing school in the emergency room and intensive care. You know why? Because you had to have fast hands. You had to think quick, you had to do things quick. And I always remembered as I was scurrying around, okay, quick, get the ET tube. Okay, grab that IV. Okay, you move them over there. Okay, you stand here. I was doing it so fast, and I could hear my father's words: "You have fast hands. You have fast hands." And as I did my nursing, it always reminded me of my destiny, that it was more than just a job, that it was a destiny and a calling. And that's exactly how I looked at my nursing career. So speak life over your children. Now, some sons will get a blessing from their father Jacob, some will get a rebuke, but all will get a destiny, a prophetic destiny. So let's look at it. What will it be? So let's look at the words Jacob used to call his sons together. He said, "Gather together, listen, and assemble yourselves." So the word gather is asaph. Asaph is part of Joseph's name. And look, it means to collect from an inappropriate place. So when you gather, it's where you're not supposed to be. And now you gather together where you're supposed to be. That's the unity of the Bible. So to bring together, return to its proper place. And that's exactly what happens in a harvest. You plant the seed, it grows, you take it off, and you bring it back to where it came from, in the hands of the one who sowed the seed in the first place. And I love that because it's also the name for a rear guard. And sometimes that's what God has called our rear guard in the Psalms. And then he says, listen, and it's the word Shema, the number one prayer in Judaism, right? Shema means to pay attention, to listen intently, but also that word Shema does not just mean listen, it also means obey. So when you listen to the Father, he expects you to obey him. That's the right relationship between father and sons. So he uses that word here. He says Shema, listen and obey. And then he uses the word assemble yourselves. And that's the word kabatz. Kabatz means to keep together, to collect in a central place. And it's where you get the word kibbutz, where they all gather and have things in common. And that comes from this word, to assemble. So he wants to bring us together as one. And that's the whole point of this story. He's calling his sons together as one. So remember, the right of the firstborn had three privileges. He got the double portion, but he also had the authority in the absence of the father to lead the rest of the family. And then he would rule over the younger ones, or the ones who were under him, and the whole household. So remember, this firstborn blessing was the one everyone wanted, because they were going to be like the next leader. So Judah will be given the authority and rulership in this story. Joseph would be given a double portion of wealth through his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Each son received half of the double portion that was given to Joseph. Now, when he's gone, of course, from Judah is going to come the ultimate authority and rulership. And we're going to look at that in a minute. So ultimately, Ephraim would be the largest and represent, like I already said, the 10 northern tribes. And then Judah were the 2 southern tribes. So in the north of Israel, Ephraim is the 10 tribes, and the 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, will be the southern area of Israel. And so these are all separated throughout history. So this is also repeated and echoed about Ephraim and Judah being brought back together in Zechariah 9:9, when he talks about, behold, your king is coming, daughter of Zion. Zion is the redemptive name of Jerusalem and Israel. And he says, pay attention, daughters of Jerusalem. He says, your king is coming. He's the righteous one. He's endowed with salvation. He's humble and on a donkey. And of course, that is the Messiah, Yeshua. And then he says, he will eliminate the chariot of the northern kingdoms, meaning the war chariots. And then he says, and the horse in the southern kingdom of Jerusalem from the horse. In other words, there's not going to be means to fight. And I'm going to take the bow of war will be eliminated. And I'm going to speak peace to the nations. So isn't this what Jacob is doing in this story? He's bringing all back together to be united and to speak peace to one another. And so then it says, here's the restoration of what? Judah and Ephraim in the end. He says, as you also, because of the blood of my covenant with you, I have set your prisoners free. From where? The waterless pit. That's exactly where Joseph was thrown. And because of that waterless pit and him surviving, God then took all of them to Egypt, saved them all. And then we're going to see that play out through the next book of Exodus as we start with the story of Moses. So all this is prophetic, and there is nothing that is not a prophecy in the scripture that will not take place. If it took place like this in the Old Testament, the Tanakh, everything said in the New Testament is also going to come true. And then it talks about the restoring of Ephraim and Judah. And it says what? And this is the day I am declaring that I will restore double to you. So see, it's the double blessing, and you'll get the authority to speak for me. And that's exactly what the Israelites were meant to be, to go and influence the rest of the nations with God's truth and wisdom. And this is what we're called to do in our life today as followers of Jesus, is to be a light to the nations and to penetrate like salt penetrates meat, penetrate the culture and bring truth and blessing to other people. So that's part of our calling. So Reuben, he was the firstborn. However, he lost the right of the firstborn because remember, he slept with the father's servant Bilhah. And it says he's going to be unstable as water, uncontrollable, like a dam that bursts open and causes damage. Reuben was emotional and acted out of emotion. And because of that, he lost the blessing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds like a lot of people I know, right? And he led a rebellion against Moses. His group of people led the rebellion. And we're going to come across that in the book of Numbers. But ultimately, he was restored back when he was named in the last 12 tribes in the book of Deuteronomy and also in the last book of the Bible, Revelation 7. So his descendants produced, by the way, no leaders, no prophets, no kings or judges. So Reuben, because of his own sin, there were consequences, and sometimes severe. So that was Reuben's story. And then we have Simeon and Levi, and it said they would be men of violence and fury and rage. They would take revenge when they were doing things on their own. They would be divided and scattered. And it says that they would be men of trouble and war. Okay. And this is exactly what happened is when they were scattered, eventually their people started worshiping the golden calf. And Moses, who was a Levite, killed an Egyptian for mistreating the slaves. And remember, Moses had a problem with anger. So that came from Simeon and Levi. And Jacob could see into the future what would happen through these two lines of people. And so then we get to Judah, and this is the one I really want to focus on. Judah, whose name means praiseworthy, he would be victorious, worshipped, strong like a lion whelp. Scepter will not depart from his hand until Shiloh, the Mashiach, comes. Now, Genesis 49:10 says the scepter will not depart until the one to whom it belongs comes. Who is that? Well, the Tanakh uses this word Shiloh 34 times in scripture. However, there's only one time that Shiloh is used to describe a person. And those that believe in Yeshua know that Shiloh is going to be the Messiah. Okay, so it was the first place, by the way, where they erected the very first tabernacle. Remember that? It was set up by Joshua, and it remained there almost 400 years, where it would be a place that would be a permanent place until the first temple was built. And that was Shiloh. And I visited Shiloh, and it was so fantastic. We found all kinds of pottery shards. There was a group digging up things there. And I was just imagining as I was picking up these pottery shards, like what was going on during the time of the judges, and all of that tabernacle worship was going on there. It was fantastic. So rabbinical Judaism holds firmly that Shiloh means peace, or the peaceable age when the Messiah would come. However, the earlier Talmudic writers agree that Shiloh was definitely speaking of the Messiah. So it's only here in this one verse that it says, it'll be this way until Shiloh comes. So it's speaking about the Messiah of Israel. So I already spoke about that being set up, so I don't need to go through that. And then I give you some more blessings for each of the sons of Zebulun, Dan, Issachar, Daniel. I think this one's interesting. We see Daniel in the story of Belshazzar in the writing on the wall. Do you remember that? Daniel would be the judge, where he says, you've been weighed and found wanting. And Samson was from the tribe of Dan. They would be judging. Okay. Samson would ultimately bring judgment upon the pagans, remember, pushing down the towers. In Canaan, Dan's descendants, by the way, bordered the Philistines. And so when they all came in and were given their land, Dan's people didn't want to be that close to the Philistines. And because they were so pagan and cruel, the people of Dan kind of assimilated into all the other parts of Israel. So today, they've kind of disappeared, and they're not even named in the tribal lists of Revelation 7 or First Chronicles. Interesting, huh? So out of fear, they left where God was supposed to place them. So you wonder, gosh, if they were to be judges and they were to be used by God to bless those around them, what might have happened had those people stayed in faith instead of left in fear? And in the end, they came to nothing. So I'm like, wow, that's a lesson for all of us to learn. God calls us to a certain place for a reason, to impact those around us. And we should never be afraid where God places us, because we're there for a destiny of someone around you. So if you can look at it that way, you never mind it when God gives you a new job or you have to move to another city or whatever. So after he gives Dan the blessing, he ends it with, for your salvation, we wait, O Lord. So after Judah, he gives this hope. We wait. It's the word kavah, and that's the word hope. So right after he gives Dan, who like assimilated and got lost, he speaks of salvation. So it's kind of like a little hint that after Dan gets lost, we're going to still wait and have hope for our salvation. And that's what Yeshua's name means, salvation. So the sages understood that Jacob's explanation would reflect his longing for the Messiah, the true judge of Israel, and ultimately salvation for the whole world. So observant Jews pray that blessing 3 times a day. Notice how the name of the Messiah finds its way into this blessing 3 times. So 3 times a day, the word salvation, which is the root word of Yeshua's name, is spoken 3 times. Here's the prayer. Cause the branch of your servant David to blossom forth speedily and lift up his horn through your Yeshua salvation. For we wait or hope for your salvation every day. Blessed are you, Lord, who causes the horn of salvation, Yeshua, to blossom forth. And this is the name of the prayer that they say 3 times a day. And it has the word salvation in 3 times. And I just put a picture of it here so you could see what it looks like in the Hebrew. And then I wanted to show you his name, Yeshua. And here's the letters for his name, Yod, Shin, Vav, Ayin. And it's the hand, the right hand, and that's the hand of blessing. So it's actually Yeshua's name is found in the right hand of blessing. So I thought you would like to see that as well. You could probably take a screenshot of that. And then he gives Gad and Asher. I love Asher. That name means peaceful. There's going to be peaceful people that come from that. And then Naphtali, and then in the area of the land of Galilee, this is where Yeshua began to minister and call his disciple. And so that's Naphtali, to wrestle in order to set free. Isn't that interesting? So his area of land would actually become where Jesus would minister. So look at the hints there. He's going to come to set us free, and that's where Galilee is. Okay, moving on, and we're almost done. He calls Joseph the fruitful vine planted near a well. But it said archers will attack him, but he will remain steady and strong, like a shepherd. And remember, we said Joseph is a foreshadowing of Jesus, our good shepherd, the rock, the Prince of Peace. And then Benjamin would be a wolf, bringing victory to Israel. And that is the southern tribe. Interesting, Israel's first king, Saul, was from the tribe of Benjamin. And Saul, or Paul of Tarsus, was also from the tribe of Benjamin. And he said he'd be like a ravenous wolf. Why? Because the wolf would always have victory and bring its prey back home. So it would be a sign of somebody who would be victorious. And it's in both Paul's name, King Saul of the Old Testament and Saul of the New Testament. So I think that's interesting as you look back through that destiny that's coming. Then Jacob said to Joseph, I'm about to die. Your words on your deathbed are usually your most important, right? So he said, this is what he wanted to tell Joseph. Don't worry, Joseph. God will be with you and will bring you back to the land of your fathers. You're not going to die here like me. You're going to be carried back to the promised land. And as for me, I have given you Shechem, 1 portion more than your brothers. He's going to give them the double portion, which I took from the hand of the Amorites, which was Esau's people, with my sword and my bow. So he had to fight for that double portion that he was going to give his son, Joseph. Sword means to be sharp or have wisdom. And the bow means to propel forward or to excel. So with wisdom and excellence, he won that land. And that's exactly the picture of the Messiah, that through his wisdom we live, and he propels us forward in the power of the Spirit to have a victorious life. So Shechem is the portion of land he's going to give him as that extra portion. And it means to shoulder something or responsibility. Shechem means to hold a burden. And so this is the burden that we are blessed to carry. It's the burden for the salvation of others around us. And that I carry with great humility and honor. So Jacob dies at 147 and Joseph weeps. Okay, weeping is biblical. Okay, he's weeping for him as a son, but also all those lost years and possible lost dreams. We all have dreams for our children. And sometimes we forget to speak life over them so that their dreams can be fulfilled, speaking prophetic life and wisdom over your children. And this is exactly what we saw in the New Testament with Jesus when he was praying in the garden. He looked down over Jerusalem, which is behind me, and he says, "Oh, how I longed to what? Gather you." There's the name of Joseph. I long to gather you, just like Jacob gathered all his sons. And so, did you know that the physicians took 40 days to embalm, and all of Egypt mourned for Jacob for 70 days? 40 days to be embalmed and 70 days total. So when they reached the plains of Mamre, they mourned there another 7 days. So in the end, you have 77 days. And that's the double portion. 7 means holy, complete, and you get 2 sevens, 77. So that's basically the end of the story. And so, as we know, Joseph foreshadows Messiah ben Joseph. And Jacob's blessing then to Joseph could be understood to speak of a future Messiah who would what? The government will be upon his shoulders. And that's exactly what we see in Isaiah 9:5. Unto us a child is born from the tribe of David. Unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders. And he will be given the name Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty, God, Eternal, Father, Prince, Peace. And this is exactly what the Messiah, those are his names. And so I love to look at this and go, oh my gosh, all of those names describe the character, the authority of ultimately the Messiah when he comes as king. So they mourned for Jacob. It says all of Egypt went in this long funeral procession. And it says that look how many came. The dignitaries, the members of his court, Pharaoh's court, all of Joseph's family, all the horsemen, all the chariots, they all came to accompany Jacob. Why was this so important? Because when Jacob came and dwelt in their land, the famine stopped all over the world. So it was almost like they related Jacob and his family to solving the problem of famine. And you can even look today, the church represents spiritual food and goodness. And the world under the kingdom of Satan is in a spiritual famine. So he's being honored, that whole family, as having stopped the famine in the whole world. And so I always think of the song, Swing Low, Sweet Chariots, Coming to Take Me Home. This was the story of Jacob. So Rashi, the most famous rabbi from the medieval times, said that all Egypt went to the threshing floor at the city of Atad and mourned for these 7 days. And he points out that there are 7 days of feasting, just the opposite, and the final harvest. Now remember, we said gather, and he's gathering all his sons because that's part of what we do when we gather at the end of time. And do you know what the only feast that's going to be celebrated in the God's eternal kingdom? The Feast of Sukkot, and it'll be a 7-day feast. And it's the ingathering of all the grain. So see how all these words in Hebrew all are giving you these little hints about what's coming, the end of days, the Akarit Yamim. And so that's why I love to study these things in Hebrew. You see all these gorgeous connections, and it makes studying your Bible so exciting. So after his death, Joseph's brothers were then afraid that Joseph would mistreat them, but what? No, instead he blessed them and provided for them. And that's Psalm 103:10. He does not treat us as our sins deserve. And I think this is just a perfect place to end today. So here we end the story of Jacob and the 12 tribes. And we're finished now with the book of Genesis. And here's what they say when they finish a book of the Torah. Hazak, hazak, venit hazak. It means be strong, be strong. It's your double portion. And may you be strengthened. And so that's my prayer for you today, that you would be strong, and continue to be strengthened as you study Torah and join me for this wonderful deep dive into God's Word. So Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you next time as we begin the book of Exodus, or in Hebrew, the book of Shemot. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.